Yeah, of course. Thank you all so much for having me. Um, I'll go ahead and share my screen and just kind of jump into the presentation. And it sounds like we're already being recorded, which is helpful. Okay, so is everyone able to see the slideshow? It says McFerrin Avenue.
Looks good.
Awesome. Um, so yeah, uh, like David said, my name is David Greaves. I work with NDOT on the traffic calming program, and this is, our neighborhood meeting for McFerrin Avenue. And we're meeting here virtually December 10th, 2024, at 6 p.m. Sorry, what was that? Oh, anyway. So I'll keep going. We will pause a couple times for questions and comments and things, but also feel free to use the chat feature. I've got that pulled up, so I'll be able to see if anyone shares questions that way. We're going to start by briefly overviewing what traffic calming is and how NDOT's traffic calming program in specific works. So this is a program that focuses on residential streets, and it's one that leans toward physical solutions that encourage lower speeds over significant lengths. So what that means is we try not to do these projects like one block at a time, just for efficiency and to make sure that the design measures we use work as intended. And the primary goal of the program is speed reduction, and we'll review why that's such an important aim of the traffic calming program in just a minute. There are 3 E's of traffic calming. Those are education, enforcement, and engineering. Now, I have engineering bold and underlined here because it's the thing that NDOT has the greatest ability to affect. I'm an engineer, so we're going to do a design that hopefully controls speeds with physical measures rather than relying on only education and enforcement to encourage safe driving behavior. This is all kind of within Nashville's broader safety and Vision Zero missions. Vision Zero, for anyone who doesn't know, is the goal of achieving 0 deaths and serious injuries on Nashville's public streets. Now, where speed reduction ties into that is this infographic shown on the screen. Essentially, what we see is a pedestrian that is collided with by a vehicle going 25 miles an hour has an 89% chance of survival. Not perfect, but definitely, they've got a solid chance. Unfortunately, as speeds climb up to 35 miles an hour and ultimately 45 miles an hour, that chance of being killed by that vehicle starts to go way up. So if you were hit by a vehicle going 45 miles an hour, you'd have roughly a 35% chance of surviving that encounter. So when streets apply to the traffic calming program and we collect data on them and we see that either you have really high speeds or really high volumes or significant crash history or any combination of those and a few other things that we'll address in a minute, we know that it's important to do something to try to create a safer environment for us to live in the neighborhood. As David mentioned, this is a really popular program. So when McFerrin Avenue was selected in August of 2024, there were over 575 streets in the queue. So when a street applies, we collect data and then ultimately rank them against all of the other ones that have applied. So we don't necessarily throw out streets if they didn't get selected in a particular time window. So this is sort of all of the streets that have applied so far, but not yet been chosen for traffic calming. We do choose 25 streets every 6 months. So y'all were chosen in the fall. There will be another group chosen in the spring of 2025, and then another one chosen next fall. On the right, we see a map of Davidson County. This is interactive on NDOT's website. So if anyone's curious to check it out, there will be a link at the end of this presentation for you to follow. But this is intended to be kind of a live tracker of each of those streets' statuses. So should you zoom into McFerrin Avenue, you'd be able to see your street color coded and a little bit of information about what phase your project might be in. So there are a few things that the traffic calming program has in its toolbox to slow speeds and improve conditions for pedestrians and other people using the road. But there are also a lot of things that sort of fall outside of this program's scope, and things that really just get addressed with either other parts of NDOT or other parts of Metro Nashville in general. Should any of those come up, or you have the need to talk to Metro for anything else, we want to make sure that everyone's aware of Hub Nashville as a resource to submit requests for just about anything. That can be accessed by calling 311 online at hub.Nashville.gov, or there's an app that you can download onto your phone and file that kind of request a little easier. So I mentioned that we collect data and rank the streets by need. This is a little bit of detail about how all that happens. So when a street applies, we go out and measure the speeds of the vehicles driving, the volume, so how many vehicles used that street. We take a look at the crash history to see if any pedestrians or cyclists have been hit by cars in the last, I think it's 10 years. And then non-driver accommodations and trip destinations. That's first, do you have sidewalks or not? So if you do have sidewalks, it's actually a couple points that you don't get in that score. And then trip destinations are things like libraries or schools, parks, basically land uses that we know generate pedestrian trips, and we want to make sure that we account for that when we are comparing all of these streets and choosing them for projects. So McFerrin has been chosen. So some combination of those 5 factors led to you all rising to the top of that list. And soon we're going to kind of talk about some of the specific ideas we have in mind. This was the data that we collected on McFerrin Avenue, when we were doing that prioritization process. So the 85th percent speed was 33 miles an hour. What that means is 15% of drivers that were measured were going some amount faster than that number, and 85% were going 33 miles an hour or below. You did have a pretty high volume for the traffic calming program, just over 4,500 vehicles in a day. That's definitely the upper range of what we see, but not so high that you were no longer eligible for this kind of project. And then you have a very wide street relative to most neighborhoods. So between 35 feet and 37 feet is what we measured. It varies a little bit, not too much, but that's one thing that can induce speeding on roads like McFerrin Avenue. And then this is a map of the project extents. So it goes all the way from Main Street to the south and up to West Eastland Avenue to the north. So everything in between those two streets is in bounds of those projects. And then you'll see this is actually a zoomed in screenshot of that interactive map I mentioned earlier. So we can see in the light purple lines that a lot of streets around you all have also applied for traffic calming, but not yet been selected. There are a few traffic calming projects that have been installed in this neighborhood. Chickamauga is the closest. So if anyone is curious to see what a project like this looks like in real life, you can just head a block north and visit them. And then there's also been some over in the McFerrin Park neighborhood as well that you all can check out should you want to see these in person. This is the first time I'll pause and just kind of get any questions, comments from you all. Next, we're going to review the toolkit and then our design proposal. But I want to make sure that nobody had questions about what I've covered so far before we move on.
David, I've got a question for you. You mentioned something about traffic volume, and there's a threshold above which streets do not qualify for traffic calming. Is that right?
Yes. Well, more or less. So the threshold that we're able to do a project with all of the tools available that we'll talk about in a minute is 5,000 vehicles per day. if a street does apply and they're over that, it just means that we have different measures available to do designs. So they don't get like a meeting and a project exactly like this, but they're still streets that NDOT here is concerning to neighbors, and they'll consider projects for them as well. Just not one that's like we're talking about tonight.
So the reason I'm asking for a specific reason, and this is pretty coincidental, but do you happen to know when what date the traffic counter was out?
I don't. I can look it up, but I don't have that information handy right now.
Okay. Um, there was a stretch of about 2 weeks where they were replacing either a gas or a water line on Main Street, which is the major intersection near the beginning of McFerrin.
Mm-hmm.
For a few of those days, the entrance to McFerrin Avenue from Main Street or Gallatin Road was closed off. That particular day, I noticed there was a traffic counter on McFerrin Avenue.
Oh, got it.
So I don't know, by the time I could make a label to leave on the traffic counter saying this may not be an accurate representation of traffic volume on this street because the entrance is closed due to ongoing construction, the thing was gone. So I wanted to throw that out there. I have the date of that somewhere, and I just wanted to know if that was around the same time that you guys were counting traffic volume there. I can.
Yeah, that's a good question. Was it last spring, or I guess when was this applied for? Were you selected like the first time, the first round after applying?
At the beginning, you said August.
Yeah, so August is when we like finish the full data collection and prioritization work. Typically, we'll do that counting and data collection on the earlier side, so like kind of shortly after the application period. So if you applied last spring, it would have been like late spring, early summer at the latest, and then we took a couple months to kind of like clean that data and just make sure everything squared up before announcing the selections in August.
Okay.
Do you happen to remember what date the water line was going in?
The day I noticed the traffic counter and the road was closed was May 3rd.
Okay, got it. Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and check on that and see, but that's certainly good to know.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, well, I will go ahead and move on, and then we'll pause a couple more times before the meeting's over. So the measure that NDOT uses most often on neighborhood traffic calming projects are called speed cushions. These are modular rubber devices. Oh, what was that? Okay. These are modular rubber devices.
Hold on, David. Bill, did you have a question?
No, well, fine. I just was not clear about whether are you muting us or are we?
Oh, yeah, I
Can-
did mute you when you were talking. I did.
Oh.
But you can always
Sure.
unmute yourself.
That's all right. No, we don't have a question. We're fine.
Okay.
All right. So these work similar to speed bumps, but they're stretched way out to achieve a target speed of between 20 and 25 miles an hour. So a speed bump is really short. You'll find them in like grocery store parking lots, and those generally ask that drivers go 5 to 10. Here, we're really hoping that drivers just go at or around the speed limit. So these are stretched so that the impact is less than a speed bump might be. They're about 3 inches tall, 6 feet wide. That width is specific. So the reason why we have that limited and install these in rows is so that emergency vehicles with wider wheelbases are able to more easily kind of get over these. The thought is the wheels kind of hit those tapered edges and don't go as high as a smaller vehicle or truck would need to. They're definitely not perfect, but that's sort of the intent behind these. And the reason why they're more common than speed tables. We also see these in Nashville. There's a few reasons why we might consider them on a roadway, but generally we try not to put these on ones where emergency traffic might be expected to use to access other streets, which I think is the case for McFerrin being immediately off of Main Street. You can see these are made out of the same materials, so it's all the same stuff. It's just a difference of how they're laid out. And the reason that NDOT prefers these as sort of the primary speed reduction method is because we know they work really well. Essentially, what we're looking at here are the results of before and after studies of 6 projects. So we can see that the average speed came down from 31 miles an hour to 22 miles an hour. And then the 85th speed percent that we discussed earlier came down from 37 all the way to 25. So what that tells us is that on streets where we're looking to take speeding and reduce it back to safe speeds, these are a good option that achieve those results. Now, we're not able to do vertical measures everywhere. If you have a curvy road or one with hills too steep for things like speed cushions, we can use a few other tools to kind of supplement those. Radar feedback signs are one example of that. So I think we've all seen these before, but essentially it's a device, solar powered, that reads the speed of an approaching vehicle and shows it back to them. And that's next to a speed limit sign. So should one be speeding, they would see, oh, I'm going faster than the speed limit, and ideally take that as a cue to slow down. Now, unlike the speed cushions or tables, these don't physically affect a driving vehicle. So if they weren't paying attention to the signs, they wouldn't be affected. And there's not any enforcement quality to these. So it's not taking any pictures. It's not writing tickets. It's purely information for the driver to do with what they will. We can also do pavement narrowing. So this is where we take a wide road with extra pavement and stripe edge lines at a narrower width to indicate that drivers should be driving within those lines, and it can sort of subtly make it feel a little more claustrophobic and induce lower speeds. It can also, on roadways without sidewalks, increase comfort for pedestrians because it sort of delineates some space where they can expect cars to be and cars can expect people to be. They aren't sidewalks, but it is something that can have that small benefit for walking. Similar to narrowing, but applied to intersections, are something called bulb outs. These essentially are intended to make turning safer at intersections, particularly for pedestrians. So they work in a couple of ways. They'll take turning radii and sharpen them up a little bit. And when you sharpen turning radii, that means vehicles have to drive slower in order to make that turn. We're looking for them to go a speed that they have time to observe if they're turning into a crossing pedestrian or bicyclist or another vehicle. I'm essentially trying to prevent the accidents that happen when people go really fast around curves and surprise people. They can also help sight lines. So on the image to the bottom right, this is a neighborhood that experiences pretty heavy on-street parking. And when vehicles park too close to crosswalks, that can obstruct the view of vehicles between pedestrians and cars. So hopefully by what's called daylighting intersections, we can help prevent that effect and generally improve the pedestrian environment. And then it also shortens the distance that people have to be in conflict with vehicles as they're crossing the road. So if you can imagine you were crossing this intersection at the top left before the bulb outs were installed, there's a lot of pavement that you have to get across before you're back and safe on the sidewalk, where after the bulb outs were installed, there's really only about 20 to 22 feet where you and a vehicle would be in the same place at the same time. On wide roads that don't see a lot of on-street parking, we can do things called chicanes. This is where we take a center line and sort of zigzag it back and forth across the road. That removes the sort of straight shot that drivers can use to go fast. So when we see really straight roads, kind of like McFerrin, actually, this is a tool that we consider to slow vehicles down just by forcing them to maneuver back and forth. This is another thing that kind of falls into that category of visually but not physically affecting vehicles. So we don't have any like actual barriers here. If someone did just floor it, they would still be able to go fast. It is just striping. And then the other disadvantage of these is it takes what would otherwise be more on-street parking and reduces it. So we see on the image to the bottom left, you have cars parked on the left side, but they're not able to park on that right side. And then lastly, we have traffic circles. These work similar to bulb outs, but they narrow the intersection from the inside out rather than the outside in. These are intended to function like a small roundabout where if you're going straight, kind of just go counterclockwise around it. If you wanted to make a left turn, you'd go counterclockwise still and go all the way around that circle before going to the street to the left. These generally work best at large intersections because they take up a good amount of room for vehicles to be able to, make those maneuvers. So most often we see intersections that are a little too small for these to function properly, but they are something that we do from time to time. Next is the concept that we have drawn up, but before I jump in there, I want to just see if anyone had questions about what we've covered, or we can, just sort of move on and take a look at what we're proposing. Sounds like we can just keep going. So what we are looking at here is our kind of rough draft of the traffic calming project. So we have found, looks like 7 locations that we think would be a good fit for speed cushions. And then there were also 3 locations where we think bulb outs might be worth considering, but it's something that we do want to hear your feedback on. So from left to right, got a set of cushions kind of shortly after that light. I want to say that's maybe 400 feet or so from Main Street or Gallatin Avenue. And then that first intersection was relatively large. And it's one that I think people do cross if they're kind of traversing east to west, parallel to Gallatin there. So one where we thought bulb outs might be a good idea. The second set of bulb outs is not at an intersection itself, but it's at a striped crosswalk where we've observed sometimes has vehicles parked closer than is actually like legal to park in a crosswalk. So the thought about putting bulb outs here is that it would have that pedestrian benefit of shortening the crossing distance, as well as preventing vehicles from parking too close to it and blocking drivers' view of pedestrians crossing. And that's especially relevant here because this is immediately in front of a school. So we want to make sure that we're considering that when we are developing this design. The last place that we thought bulb outs might be a good idea is that First Street south of Cleveland Street. Just because that was another intersection where both of the roads intersecting were fairly wide. So we've got some room to tighten it up a little bit and hopefully encourage slower speeds as drivers are making turns around this neighborhood. So that is my spiel about what's going on here. Next is sort of next steps in the process and how everyone can further engage and ultimately vote on the project. But before we move on to that, I want to make sure I hear from all of you, just if you have any thoughts, concerns, things that we may have missed in our initial consideration. And I say that because the next step is a site visit where we go out in person, sort of observe the street, take some measurements. And I really want to know, is there anything in particular we should be looking for, observing while we go out there.
I do have a comment to make in regards to that. There's a unique situation on this stretch of road, and your map is helpful in describing this, between the stoplight at Gallatin Avenue and your vertical measure C. On the northbound lane of McFerrin Avenue, there are 0 residential addresses. So we have a 35 to 37 foot wide road. It's a straight shot. I mean, that's a straight line. Those two things are pretty conducive to speeding, and I don't like to admit it, but I will catch myself speeding on that stretch of road. One of the things that I've noticed is that because there are no residential addresses on the northbound side of McFerrin in that whole section up until the last vertical measure, nobody parks there. So now you have, the optical effect of a extra wide road. So that might be something to keep an eye open for. And we might consider doing something with that space that is not generally used for anything but speeding. People store their cars in front of their houses in general. And there are no houses that face McFerrin on that side of the street.
Well, actually, this is Bill speaking. One of the things that the first thing that we talked about, tried to get done along McFerrin was right where you're talking about, David, in that first, block on McFerrin. There is no speed limit sign whatsoever. So people coming off of Gallatin, going northbound, never see a speed sign on McFerrin. I mean, I think the first sign is way after the school. So we see that. We live right at the corner of Myrtle and McFerrin. So we see the people come off of Gallatin in a hurry, going downhill, no speed limit sign, a lot of high speed going northbound on McFerrin there.
Right, especially when school is not in session. I mean, we saw police out there monitoring when we were home over the summer or until we came to Mexico, where we are now. And yeah, they just come zooming down as soon as it's 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock and the school's dispersed. It's like a speedway.
The other thing that is kind of directly to what you were talking about, David, is actually that there are no addresses in that first block, but what we've seen increasingly happen is parking there in the evenings and nighttime, because it's people who are going to some of the bars or restaurants on Gallatin. So actually that side of the northbound side of McFerrin in that first block, actually now in a lot of evenings, maybe it's just the weekends, I really do have a lot of cars parked on it. They're not residents, but they're people who are looking for parking they can't find on the other side of Gallatin.
Right.
Yeah,
But
understood.
My first reaction is I love it. I mean, we speed cushions are going to help tremendously, is my impression.
Got it.
This is Melissa, Bill's wife. I'm on his computer with him. I had the misfortune of an accident trying to come out of the alley parallel to Marine about a year ago or more. And, it was my fault because I didn't see a car coming on McFerrin from the direction of Eastland. But my impression was that car was going very fast. And at that time, there was a van that was always parked right up to the exact where the alley started. So it was very difficult to see. And we use that alley a lot so we can park on the right side of the street in front of our house. And so, yeah, something that keeps people from parking right up to the corner of the alleys and streets would be helpful. Because it blocks visibility if you're trying to get on McFerrin and like you're a resident of McFerrin.
Yeah, got it. Well, first, I'm so sorry to hear that you experienced that accident. Definitely is not ideal. Yeah, that is sort of part of the thought behind measures like bulb outs that prohibit parking at those conflict points to remove that very issue of large vehicles blocking the view. We may not be able to do every street, and then alleys are sort of lower than that in the hierarchy. But should a street like this go from a condition where people are able to comfortably go very fast, like it sounds like the person that hit you might have been doing, to one where we have vertical measures like these that pretty much bring everyone down to a more manageable level. Ideally, we'd have a much easier time exiting or intersecting with the street without the fear that someone is going to, really surprise you with a high speed like that.
I think another thing to point out is that there are between and that whole stretch that you have highlighted there, there's not a single stop sign.
Mm-hmm.
And with the exception of at the very beginning, there are no four-way intersections either. There are two right by Gallatin Road there, but beyond that, all of these roads, Marina, Maxwell, Mansfield, whatever the other ones are, Silverdine, and then Silverdine does have one. Those all stop at McFerrin. So that I don't know if that's a unique thing or not, but I don't know what the rules are, but it seems to me that putting a stop sign or two in this stretch of road might be a measure that could be taken as well.
Yeah, understood. I completely agree with your assessment of how the street grid creates that condition where it's not always kind of that four-way intersection that makes it a little easier to traverse. There is a pretty hard and fast rule that stop signs cannot be used as traffic calming devices. Now, that being said, should any of these intersections have enough turning volumes or crash history or other reasons where stop signs can be applied, that's how it would be considered. So from the perspective of this project, we're not able to, kind of declare that the stop control at any of these spots is changing, but I would encourage you to request a stop sign for any intersection that you're concerned about. And that can be done through Hub Nashville. It's a pretty quick process. But that is something that comes up from time to time. And the hope is that should we install other measures to control speeding, the dangers created by kind of the lack of stop control on this stretch would be reduced.
We only have about 15 minutes left. Do you have more presentation?
Yes, I think I can finish up in like 10, but do you all want me to move on to the rest of the presentation?
Sure.
Awesome. And I'm happy to hang on after 7, but I do want to make sure that no one's, like missing anything. So next steps in the program are the design process, like I mentioned earlier. So we'll do a site visit. We're going to produce construction plans. That'll be useful for the contractor to know exactly how to build the project that we ultimately design based on those field observations and the feedback we're receiving tonight. Once that's done, we can either schedule a second neighborhood meeting to review those plans, kind of talk about our findings, or we can post them online and go directly to the online ballot. The ballot, for anyone who's wondering, basically is where anyone who is owning property along McFerrin Avenue will submit whether or not they would like the project to proceed based on what they see in the plans. So that's done online or over the phone. It's a 6-week window, and it takes 2/3 of respondents saying, yes, we do want this for the project to move forward. Once that happens, if it is successful, it'll be placed into the construction queue, and then NDOT's contractors will eventually build it. One thing to note is that construction queue at the moment is pretty long. We choose 25 projects every 6 months, but there has been a buildup of projects in the last few years. So we're definitely working through them at an increasing pace, but it is a little while before a street that votes yes rises to the kind of front of that line. I am interested in hearing from you all if that second neighborhood meeting is desired, or if you'd rather move forward viewing the plans when they're posted. We're happy to do it either way. It's really up to you all.
I would like Sean, who is our councilman. I would like him to be present for one of these meetings, or at least in some capacity be able to provide input, because I think that this is a project that's important to him as well, and he has experience with it and may have some insight.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we'll go ahead and plan on getting a second one scheduled. It only takes, a month or so. We'll like bring those plans to the meeting, and if we don't hear any like major curveballs, it'll be a quick process to then move on to the ballot. So yeah, that sounds good. We'll get a meeting scheduled with Councilmember Parker, and
the reason I say one of the reasons I add that is also because McFerrin Avenue was also selected for resurfacing, pending the budget being available for it. But it is in the queue for resurfacing, and then also it was highlighted as one of the Choose How You Move initiative streets to have an overhaul. So it seems reasonable that those three things, so this project and those two projects, could all work in unison at some point. It may look like something more significant than speed bumps, but I think I would defer to Sean on that because he's more in the loop on those items.
yeah, that's definitely a good reason to coordinate a little more closely between all those projects. Resurfacing for a traffic calming project like this is pretty easy. Essentially, these all attach with bolts. So when a street needs to get repaved, we unbolt, set him aside, repave, and then put him back. The complete street Choose How You Move thing, I'll do a little bit of digging on that. I certainly wouldn't want to step on or derail any other project, so we'll coordinate internally and just make sure everything is squaring up okay. But that's all good to know.
On the ballot issue, obviously this would be all the property owners who front on McFerrin, and in the case where there's properties that are their side lot line is on McFerrin, those would also be part of affected folks, and those would be folks voting as well.
That's absolutely correct, and I've switched to the slide that shows that exact ballot zone.
Oh, okay.
So this is Metro Nashville's like mailing list generator that we use for things like zoning changes or any reason we need to reach out to property owners. But we can see that any parcel of land that touches McFerrin Avenue within these limits is included. And that also includes any like owned in common properties. So you can see kind of toward Main Street, those townhomes, or I think they're condos maybe, those were each invited to this meeting as well as the condos up on Eastland and McFerrin. Schools also get one vote, and it's important to note that if owners with multiple properties, we'll only send them one, so we kind of see when there's duplicates and remove those. And then commercial businesses do not get sent mailers, nor do vacant properties. So I think there's like a parking lot and a commercial building of some sort down on Main Street. They were invited to this meeting, but they won't ultimately have that kind of final decision-making ability when it comes time to do that ballot.
Okay, good.
Just a couple more things to cover. The ballots come as postcards. They look pretty similar to the ones that were sent out to invite people to this meeting, but they have a unique ID code. We use that on the back end to just verify that the votes that we're getting are legit. So make sure to pay attention to that. If your neighbor gets a mailer and you need to vote, don't use their code, because then it's like a duplicate and it gets confusing. But I do want to say, if you think that you should have gotten the mailer and did not, please feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to look up your your name, address, give you your code. So all that is just to say, it's worth kind of checking in with your neighbors, and if your neighbor gets a card and you did not, feel free to use that 6-week window to kind of figure out how you can get your vote submitted. Let's see. I think that's about all I've got. I'm happy to go back to any of the slides we visited so far. Meeting 2 will be a shorter recap of everything we've covered tonight and a longer look at the plans themselves. And then, yeah, we'll come back with a little more information about the other projects that were mentioned and how they might interface with McFerrin Avenue. But any last questions before we sign off? And I'll note that this is my contact information. It's worth copying NDOT TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov. Should you reach out to me, just to make sure that everyone that needs to be in the loop can be. But feel free to reach out to us should anything else come up. And then lastly, there's the QR code that I mentioned earlier to NDOT's Traffic Calming website, as well as some social media handles. But any final thoughts? I know that we're getting close to 7, but like I mentioned, I'm happy to hang on if necessary.
No other comment. I think it's great. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for sharing, David and David.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. I will say, Leslie, if you wouldn't mind sharing the recording of this video, I'll be able to send it to Metro and have them posted on YouTube for any neighbors that weren't able to attend tonight.
Sure. Thank you for attending. And when you coordinate with Sean, which I'm assuming would be like around our February meeting, just let me know. I'm happy to host it.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay. All right. Well, if you all have any additional questions, you have David's information. Please reach out to him. In the meanwhile, happy holidays if I don't see you all before the new year.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank
you
you,
very much.
Leslie.
Thanks.
Only if you come to Mexico, Leslie.
Well, I know I'm not coming to Mexico anytime soon.